change the fortune cookie right away. All right, see if you can go in now and please let Sadeqa be there. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just waiting for our author to join us. I've left her a message to remind her, but she should be here shortly. So I'm just going to leave the music on for you to enjoy until we get started. Thanks for coming.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Sadeqa. How are you?
I'm okay. I don't see you though. Do you see me?
No, I'm going to actually give you just a minute. I'm going to invite you. I have to make you a host first.
Okay.
And then I'm going to invite you up on stage. Okay, so now you'll see the invite and you'll have to accept it.
Okay, it says you're now a producer.
Right.
Do I hit dismiss?
No, and then we're going to make your video live. So let's see, invite to video mode.
Accept.
Okay, it takes just a minute. Oh, we can see your beautiful smile now. Hi. Okay, I'll invite myself up
Hello.
there with you. So give me
Okay.
just a minute. Okay, and there we are. Yay.
Oh, hi, Susan. It's so good
Hi,
to
Happy
see
New Year.
you.
So excited to see you.
Here, I always get nervous when I go to a new platform.
I know, I know. It's really user friendly once you've used it for the first time. It's just getting used to the new platform. But
Hmm.
I love it because we can invite people up on stage to join us, which is really fun. Um,
Oh,
and I've got Amber out there. She's going to be our producer. So she's changed our fortune cookie in the middle where you can see the website where you can get a copy of your book. And
oh, yay.
if anybody has any questions or comments during the event, they can invite themselves up on stage and ask a question and chat with you live, which is really fun.
Oh,
So, hello and happy New
fabulous.
Year, Firesiders. Welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the power of books. I'm your host, Susan Macbeth, and I'm delighted today to be hosting award-winning author Sadeqa Johnson to talk about her powerful and important book, Yellow Wife. Before we do, I just want to remind those of you who are new in the audience about a couple features you can use. If this is your first time on Fireside, you'll see a black circle in the bottom left-hand screen that's called the hamburger. And you can click on that. You can invite yourself up on stage at any time if you want to say hello to Sadiqa, ask questions, or just have a chat with her, which is a fun amenity with Fireside. Then you'll see a react button in the lower right hand portion of your screen. You can click on that and send a little button. You can send a heart that you love Sadiqa, or a like if there's something you like. There's all other kinds of emojis. And Sadiqa, you will hear sound effects, which each of those. So maybe somebody wants to hit the clap button now to show her what we mean. Okay, so you'll see that, and it's kind of fun. So, and also welcome to those of you who are joining us live on our public profile page and listening in live on our social media channels. As I mentioned, I'm excited today to be talking to Sadeqa Johnson about her most recent book, Yellow Wife, which, congratulations, was just selected by Barnes and Noble as the January book of the month. How amazing is that?
It's so amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, and also was selected by Oprah Winfrey as a top historical read for 2021. I mean, not so
Oh, wow.
exciting, right? So before we get into our conversation, let me give you a little background about this talented writer. Sadeqa is a former public relations manager who spent several years working with well-known authors such as J.K. Rowling, Amy Tan, and Bishop T.G. Jakes. I hope you have some stories to share with us about that. Before becoming an author herself, her debut novel, Love in a Carry-On Bag, I love that title, won the USA Best Book Award for African American Fiction. And you'll see a theme here is that every book that she writes wins some kind of major award. So that's pretty impressive. Her book, Second House from the Corner, was hailed by Essex Magazine as a Go On Girl Book Club selection for 2017. And then there was me, which won the National Book Club Conference Fiction Award Book of the Year and was a finalist for the Phyllis Wheatley Award. She's also received the Black Pearl Magazine Author of the Year for 2017. So as I mentioned, basically everything she touches turns to gold. She's definitely got the Midas touch for writing. And I look forward to chatting with you today. Welcome, Sadeqa.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love Adventure by the Book, so I'm glad to be here today with you all.
Thank you, and we love you too. And I just wanted to mention too that Sadiqa is a member of our Novel Network group. And for those of you who are not familiar with Novel Network, you should be, because book clubs can join for free, and it doesn't have to be actually a book club. It can be a sorority group or a neighborhood friends group or a church group. If you're reading books together, you can visit our website novelnetwork.com. And gain access to about 150 authors and counting, including debut authors, New York Times international bestsellers, who are willing and available to talk to book clubs. Book clubs join for free. They pick out the authors they want. The schedule of the author is right there on the site. You can one-stop shopping for all book clubs. And Sadiqa is a member. You can schedule her for a Novel Network visit anytime you want. And I recommend you do that because she is phenomenal, as you will see today.
Oh, thank you,
So
Susan.
so, for those of you who are familiar with our program, we like to start off by talking about their trajectory into the writing career of our authors. You know, we know her now as an uber successful author, multiple award winning, Barnes and Noble, Oprah, you know, just to name drop a few. But, you know, she had to start somewhere too. And so I want to go way back to your childhood or as early as you can remember when writing and reading inspired you and what that experience was like, what you experienced.
The earliest memories I have of writing, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. So we would go to their house for the weekend. And my grandmother was always buying me notebooks from like, it was called the five and dime back then, right? Or the 5 and 10, Woolworths. And so she would always bring me notebooks. And so they were stacked in our bedroom at her house. And I would just write little stories, things that I was dealing with, whatever was going on, I would play make believe in these notebooks. I've always had a very vivid imagination, and I've been a lover of books since I can remember. I remember when I was in elementary school, to get to school, we had to pass by the library. So the library was kind of our local hangout. And so I would check out books. Over the summer, I took out a book for every day of the week. I would go every Monday and I would check 7 books and I would read a book a day. And then I would go back the next week. And it was an event for me. I dressed up. My library card was precious to me. So that was kind of the beginning for me. I would definitely say sketching in those notebooks, but also just being a big lover of reading.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. But yeah, I love those stories of people who get inspired early. And a lot of times it is through grandparents and a lot of times through libraries as well. So then you got that passion and that interest, and then when you started writing, how did that come about? Because you were a PR agent first. And so you know, were you writing at that time and wanting to be a writer, or did you do that first and then this was the next step?
I actually wanted to be an actress. So I went to a high school for engineering and science. So I stood out like a red thumb always. I was always standing out because I was at school with really brainy people. And I just wanted to do theater. I wanted to do Shakespeare. And so I ended up going to college as a theater major. But my goal was never to graduate college. I thought I would go to New York City. I would go to school for 2 or 3 weeks. I would be discovered. Next thing you know, I would be on Broadway or The Cosby Show or something, but I wasn't really there to get my degree. Well, 4 years later, I graduated and realized that I needed to do something to pay the bills and got my first job in publishing because it was my love of reading and I wanted to work somewhere where I felt comfortable. While I was working at Scholastic Books, I had the privilege of working with J.K. Rowling on the first 3 Harry Potter books. And it was there that I kind of got the bug to write. I was constantly surrounded by books. I tried my hand at a children's book that didn't really see the light of day because I was really interested in novels. And so I started to kind of pin that first novel at Scholastic. And then I went over to G.P. Putnam Sons, and this is when I'm working with all the big New York Times bestselling authors, the Catherine Coulters and the Rebecca Walkers and Nevada Barr. And I would pick their brains. So this was back before COVID, we were close and comfy with people. And so my job as a publicist was to take the authors to the Today Show, to Good Morning America. And so I had all of this time in the back of a town car with them. And I used that time to pick their brain. What are you writing? What's your writing schedule like? How did you get an agent? How did you get started? Where do you get your ideas? And I was compiling all of this information. And at the very same time, I was starting my first novel. And I lived in New Jersey and worked in New York City. And so I would handwrite my story on the train on my way in. I closed my office door every day at 4 o'clock, pretending like I was working on a big project. But I was actually typing in those first few pages of Love in a Carry On Bag. And then I would get the novel off the printer, get back on the train, and then I would edit on my way home. And I did this for years. This was really the beginning of writing for me.
And that's really brilliant because I don't know how many authors I've talked to that, they wrote a book and then they finished writing it. And it's like, now what? And you were picking everybody's brain and gathering that information before you even got started. I mean, that's just brilliant. And the fact that you were exposed to so many great writers to really pick the cream of the crops brain is really great. So what was it like working with some of those? I mean, do you have any stories you can drop about J.K. Rowling or some of the
Oh, well, J.K. Rowling was a dream. She was very kind. I mean, very kind and very humble. And she was so sweet that after I was taken off of her books, she would still autograph copies and send me notes when she came back to Scholastic. So she was very kind. Most of the authors that I got to work with, they were all very gracious, and gave of themselves. I never disclosed the fact that I was a writer, but they were just kind and gracious with my questions. But what happened for me was I finished the novel, and had decided that I was going to quit my job. I just gotten married and I was having my first child. And so I told my husband, I said, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to take care of our son and I'm going to be a best-selling author. And he's like, you're going to quit your job? And I'm like, yes, trust me on this. And so I did all of those things. I got an agent, which was not so difficult for me because I was working in publishing. And she took my first book to market. And one by one, every single editor turned me down. And so I was distraught. I was discouraged. I was crying a lot. But she said, why don't we wait 6 months and see if the market changes and we'll give it another try. Well, my husband is an entrepreneur. We both come from entrepreneur backgrounds. And when he saw my lip on the ground, he said, what is it that we need to do? And I said, well, I need an editor. And he said, why don't we just hire an editor? And the thought never occurred to me that it could just be that simple. And it was like the universe was waiting for me to open up my brain a little bit to see that there was other ways that I could get my book in the hands of readers. And so we sat down right in that moment. We made a list of editors that I knew, and everything started to fall into place. I got an editor, I got a distribution deal, I found a marketing person, I found a design person. I became the sales manager. And so I would call up independent booksellers like Adventures by the Book, and I would say, hey, I would come up with a fake name. Hey, this is Dee Dee Murray, and I'm calling about this great book, Love in a Carry-On Bag. Can I send you a couple of copies to get them into your store? And oftentimes they would say, send me 2 copies. I'll see what I could do. We also traveled up and down the East Coast to book events. Any outdoor event, we set up tables. We had these humongous retractables, and we were really out there hand selling Love in a Carry-On Bag to anybody who would listen. And that was really how I got my start in publishing as an author.
And you are, I mean, as an author, you are an entrepreneur. In fact, we have a series of classes we do called Authorpreneurs, because we teach authors the business side of writing, which is exactly what you were doing. I mean, the fact that, your husband said, we've got to go do this. I mean, that's kind of the same thing that happened to me with Adventures by the Book. I was working at a bookstore who they just weren't very innovative. They loved books, but I said, I have this vision of all these events I want to do and this crazy, I want to travel with authors and go around the world and do these things. And I told my husband, I said, I really want to do this. And he says, well, why aren't you? And I said, because there's no company that would hire me, that doesn't exist. And he said, well, why don't you start it? And the thought had never crossed my mind. Oh, yeah. So it's nice to be talking to a fellow entrepreneurial spirit
Yes.
with
Yeah.
a
You got to have good people around you, and you have to have a good support system for sure.
yeah. And so your first book, I know we're here to talk about Yellow Wife, but do you want to just tell us a little bit about Love in a Carry-On Bag, just because it's such a clever title and I'm curious about it.
Well, for those writers out there, I want to let you know that Love in a Carry-On Bag took me 10 years to finish. And honestly, if I had known it was going to take that long, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it. But it was drafts on drafts on drafts and editors. But it is a novel about, it's a long distance love story. She lives in New York, he lives in DC. They really want to be together, and there are all these things pulling them apart. He's a sexy lipped musician. She's a high strung publicist. They both have family drama, and then there's the distance. And so it's kind of a back and forth love story that it's near and dear to my heart because it's what got me started.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, Yellow Wife. Let's talk about Yellow Wife because it's a really important book. It's really powerful. It's beautifully written. It's hard to read in many parts. Tell us a little bit about how you got the idea for the book and what inspired you to write it.
The inspiration for Yellow Wife, I think, happened long before I even knew that this was what I was doing. We were living in New Jersey, and I was standing in my kitchen. My husband and I were looking for a new house because we've outgrown our house. We have three children, and we just were busting at the seams. And we were looking for a home, but I remember standing in my kitchen, and I heard a voice that said, "Move." And it wasn't like move down the street, move one county over. It was like move, move. And this was February of 2015. I called my husband up because he had happened to be in Virginia for a funeral. And I said, I think we should move. And he's like, well, I'm passing through this cute little town right now. And, one by one, things again started to click into place. We went down to Central Virginia. We literally just looked at the map and said, we know we don't want to go past North Carolina and we don't want to go past New York City. So where could we fall in between? My sister knew a realtor. We met her. We met her twice. And by June of that same year, we were all moved into our brand new house. I mean, it was literally 3 or 4 months and everything was a go. And I couldn't figure out like why was things happening so easy, so quickly. We basically uprooted our family. Well, 9 months later, we had some friends come down to visit us from New Jersey. And we were looking for an activity to do with them and with their children. And someone suggested that we take a walk on the Richmond Slave Trail. And the Richmond Slave Trail has 17 markers along the James River, and it tells the story of what it was like for the enslaved people as they came into Richmond. Richmond was number two in the slave trading industry behind New Orleans, which was number one. So it's very seeped in history, but also hidden history that a lot of people don't know about. And so as we're walking the trail, the kids are taking turns reading the different markers. And we get to the marker that talks about the Lumpkins jail. And it was described as a holding center and punishing site for enslaved people. In fact, over 200,000 enslaved people passed through this jail over a 15, 20-year period. And the owner of the jail, his name was Robert Lumpkin, and he was described as cruel and mean. They called him the devil. This was the devil's half acre. But it also said that he was married to a Black woman. And while he was one way in business, he was kind and considerate to her and their 5 children. And I just couldn't stop wondering what life was like for Mary Lumpkin, because we know women like her, enslaved women, had no agency over their lives and they had no agency over their children. And so I just couldn't stop wondering about her and those kids. And we move ahead a little bit further on the trail, and we come upon the African sacred burial ground. Now, during this time, when the enslaved people died, there were no ceremony for them. They literally waited for the bodies to pile up and they shoved them into the ground. And so now Richmond has deemed this area sacred. And as we walked across the grass, the friend who I was with, he started to pretend as if he was playing the African drums. And he said, do you feel that? And there was this energy. It was this undeniable energy. And I remember thinking, it feels like the ancestors are waiting for us. But then my next thought was, I think the ancestors are waiting for me. They want me to tell their story. And that invigorated me and terrified me all in the same breath because I had never written a book that happened before I was born. My other 3 novels are contemporary fiction. I wrote about things that I knew. Long distance love story. Did that, check. Mom, 3 small children, second house from the corner. I did that. And then my third novel, And Then There Was Me, was a book that I had overheard, a story. So it was things that I was familiar with. But this story took place over 100 years before I was even born. I didn't know that I had the skill set. But nonetheless, it was like the story wouldn't leave me alone. It followed these characters, these ancestors. They followed me home. I was constantly Googling different things about Mary Lumpkin and Robert Lumpkin, and it got to the point where I was borderline obsessed. But I was still like, I don't think this is for me. I think this story picked the wrong person. But I had a friend who came over to my house and she said, "What are you working on?" And I'm telling her everything I'm telling you. And I say, "But I'm terrified." And she said, "Sadiqa, the thing that scares you most is what you're supposed to be doing next." And that really just opened the door and made me feel like the least I could do was give it a try.
Wise words from your friend. And so when you walked this freedom trail for the first time with your kids, how old were your kids?
My children were 13, 11, and 10.
So what so this trail spoke to you. How did your kids react to walking that? And did you talk about it as a family, or how did that process with your kids, with your family?
In the moment as we were going through it, it was kind of like a history lesson for them. They had just moved to Richmond as well. And so they had not had this experience before. And so, it just felt like it was a right conversation to talk about, the roots of America. America was built on the back of enslaved people. And so it really opened up that dialogue. To a degree, they were a little bit young to really see the full picture, but it was enough to have a conversation.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about your book and the story you developed once you had this vision in your head of what you wanted to talk about.
Well, I knew I needed to write fiction because I am a fiction writer. And if I tried to write a 500-page nonfiction book, it would be terrible. I just know myself. I
I
need to have
doubt
a
it.
little I need to have a little bit of creativity. I need to let my imagination wander. And I need to write kind of what I'm feeling. So for me, when I started to do the research and I found out who Mary Lumpkin was, I had to make a few adjustments. She came to the jail at age 13 and she was pregnant by Robert Lumpkin at 13. I pushed my story ahead to 17 because, one, that is a lot to endure as readers. But also, I didn't want to write a YA book with such a heavy subject line. So I had to take certain liberties, like make her 17. I knew when I discovered her, she was already at the jail. So I put her on a plantation so that you can get the full picture of what her backdrop was, so that as she was moving through the story, you knew who she was by the time she reaches the jail.
And so, I mean, you talked about, the being impregnated when she was 13. That is a difficult topic, but there are difficult scenes you write in the book that are powerful and meaningful, but they're difficult to read. And so, as a writer, how did you balance which scenes you felt like were important to include, or not to include, or change, like in the instance of the 13-year-old to the 17-year-old?
I tried to be as honest and truthful as possible because it felt like I was charged to tell the truth and to shed a light on this very dark period in history. And when I didn't know what happened to Mary Lumpkin, my character's name is Phoebe Dolores Brown. What I did was take other enslaved people's stories and thread them through so that not only was I honoring her, I was honoring as many as possible. There are some difficult scenes in the book, but for the most part, most of them are true. They happened, and that was important for me. It's difficult when I wrote it. I put everything out there, and luckily, I have wonderful agents and editors who would say, "Okay, we might need to taper back here or take this scene out. Maybe there's too many flogging scenes in the book. You've made your point." So it was a combination of working with my professionals and me just really trying to put as much truth into the story as possible.
And did your kids read your book?
No. Susan, and I am so disappointed.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask if you wanted them to, or
I do. My oldest is 18, and he had promised to read it for me over the summer. He said, "Oh, I'll make it my summer reading," and got caught up. And then I have a 16-year-old now who said, one of her best friends read it and said, "Your mom's book's so good." But I think because it's me and I'm their mom, it's like, "Oh, we'll get to it. The book's not going anywhere."
I don't, they do not get the concept of how successful you really are,
They just want to make sure there's cereal in the pantry and ask me what's for dinner.
like a true teenagers that they
That's
are.
it.
So, what did it feel like? I mean, you obviously have won major awards for all your books and have received a lot of acclaim. But there's something magical about when you say the O word, Oprah, and she endorses your book. Was that a huge moment for you, or were you just like, it's another one of my million awards? Or what did that mean to you? What did it feel like, and how did you find out about it?
Oh, wow. That was huge. And I will tell you that I am a big vision boarder. So I've been doing vision boards, a couple of times a year since before. I mean, I just don't even remember when I was not doing vision boards. And every single vision board always has a picture of Oprah in the left-hand corner of my board. So I was in my office, I think I was writing, and I'm also a tall poppy writer. So one of my fellow tall poppies sent me a text to say, "Oh, shoot." And she sent me the link. And I open it up and I'm like, "Oh, shoot." Like it's Oprah. And so I don't even think I could breathe for a couple of minutes, because it was like, wow, what you put out there, what you intend, you can manifest it. And that was definitely, being close and connected to Oprah has been a big dream for a very long time. So it was magical.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I want to remind the audience that they can invite themselves up on stage anytime they want to ask a question if they would like, or just to say hello, make a comment, whatever you would like. Um, but let's talk a little bit about you walked the Freedom Trail, so it was inspiration. But was there a lot of research in the book, and how did you go about doing that, and how much of a role did that play?
The very first thing I did was, well, I started with Google because, we have that at our fingertips. And so I started with Google. And when I couldn't, one of my friends always says to me, she tells her son, "Google can't write your paper for you. It's only as far as you can go with Google." So it was coming up on break for my children. So I grabbed my two daughters and I drove out to a plantation in Charles City, Virginia, which Yellow Wife starts off in Charles City, Virginia, because of this trip. And we went to go visit a plantation. I paid, I went on the tour. And I have to say that if you've done plantation tours, for me, it was very disappointing because the guide spent a lot of time talking about the architecture of the house, the paintings on the wall, the furniture, the people who lived in the house, but largely left out the enslaved people and the contributions that they made to the lives of the people who they cared for. So at the end of the tour, I'm kind of asking questions, and the guide says, "If you want to know more about the enslaved people, go down to the kitchen house." And so my daughters and I, we traipsed down there, and on the wall of the kitchen, there is a big slave ledger that has the names, the dates, the purchase prices of the enslaved people who lived on that particular plantation. And I remember looking up and I saw the name Phoebe spelled with a Y. And I had already been kind of fooling around with different names for her, and nothing was really feeling right. But when I looked up and I saw Phoebe with a Y, I thought, that's it. And so I was able to take that from the plantation that we were visiting. As I started to write the story, the very first scene that I saw in my head was Phoebe and her mother in the loom house. And her mother was whispering recipes that she didn't want her to forget: how to cure dropsy and a fever and lockjaw, and those different recipes that she thought was important to her. It was her passing on her knowledge to her daughter. And for Phoebe, it was like a lullaby. And so she listened to her mother every night as she was going to bed, and she was memorizing these recipes. Well, the next day they are awoken by the bell of the plantation, and her mother looks to her and she goes, "Dolores, come." And I thought, oh, Dolores is her middle name. That's how her mother claims her for herself. Because on a plantation in slavery, they wouldn't have much that they could claim. And so by not calling her daughter Phoebe, she called her Dolores. It was her keeping a part of herself. And then Brown came because before my grandmother passed away, she was helping me do our family tree. And she said, you had an Aunt Viney, Viney Brown. She was a tough cookie. She didn't take no mess off nobody. And I thought, oh, well, Queen Viney Brown needs to be in my story. And so that's how I got to Phoebe Dolores Brown, for her name. But all of the names in the book, as another way of honoring our ancestors, I lifted them off of various slave ledgers and out of different textbooks and things that I had read as a way of bringing in as many stories as possible. I also spend a lot of time at the Library of Virginia. They had a lot of old periodicals of 1800, 1900 Richmond so that I could get a feel for what downtown was like because it's completely different than it is today. I also spoke to a historian over at Virginia Union University who had studied this subject before. So I spent between, I'd say like April to September, just focusing on researching and understanding and world building this story out so that I could really feel it as I was going into the story.
Yeah. And do you have you led any tours or along the Freedom Trail to talk about your book? And because you're talking about the plantations, don't really talk about that portion of it. And I'm just curious, is our cultural conscience hopefully is changing, if that's going to, are you offering that, or are other plantations offering that now? What do you see out there that's educating people about this period in history and what really happened?
So I was asked by a hiking group in Richmond to hike the trail with them and kind of talk about my discovery and what I was thinking as I was moving through the trail and how Yellow Wife corresponds with Mary Lumpkin's real life. And so I've done that before. I have not ventured out to go back to these different plantations since I wrote the book, but I would hope that things have changed. I'm currently reading a book called How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. And he talks about his visit to Monticello and talking to the guides and how the language is changing. And, every few months they go back and they fix things and they're adding things. Now they have a whole Sally Hemings tour, where before, 20 years ago, it was like, oh, we don't talk about her.
Yeah.
So slowly but surely, we do see a little bit of things changing.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that book, but what other books have you read, are you reading, that inspire you, or that you recommend to others?
I just finished a short story, a book of short story called Training School for Negro Girls by Camille Akers, which was amazing. If you're interested in pre Civil War stories, The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. was wonderful. Last year, I read The Forest of Vanishing Stars by Kristen Harmel, which I devoured.
Yeah.
And I've been dabbling a little bit into YA books. So I finished over the break Children of Blood and Bones, which I thought was amazing. Like, took my breath away. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about the book. Like, when I put it down, it was like all I could do to not read.
And are your kids, I know you said your kids didn't read your book, but are they readers?
My 16-year-old daughter is. She's right now finishing up the Twilight series.
Mhm.
My 13-year-old daughter, she goes back and forth where I think she's a lot like me, but sometimes she doesn't want to be. So like I'll know she's reading, but then she doesn't want to talk about the books. But my son, I don't know. I feel like I was reading him bedtime stories. I was making sure he had a summer reading list. But now that he's like a senior in high school and ready for college, he's not reading beyond what's required. And I'm hoping that's just an 18-year-old boy thing.
Oh,
And that as he moves into adulthood, he'll find his way back to his love for books.
yeah, I don't think my kids read as much during their teen years. We read voraciously when they were little, and they've come back to it. So there's hope. Those teenage
There's
years,
hope.
there's a lot of other stuff going on.
Yes, yes.
So, Sadiqa, what do you want people to get out of reading your book?
I want people to know that women like Phoebe Dolores Brown like Mary Lumpkins, like they were smart. They were women who knew how to make lemons out of lemonade. They could make a way out of no way. They were ingenious. They were clever. They were human, they were human beings. They loved hard, they fought hard, and that we stand on their shoulders. And if women like Mary Lumpkin and Phoebe Dolores Brown can go from one place to the other, then we can do anything because our circumstances are nowhere near as dire as theirs were. And so I hope my story is an inspiration to women, and that we could say that we know where our country started. I think it's time that we continue to have these conversations. If we are honest about, this is where we began. So what can we do differently? How can we move through the world differently? At the very beginning of the book, I have a quote by William Wilberforce that says, once you know, you could never not know again. And so when you read Yellow Wife, you could never not know that this is the history of our country again. And so how are you going to move differently? How are you going to be different in the world?
And how does that feel as an accomplished writer to know that your voice is playing an important role in doing just that?
It I don't know that it's something that I completely always process. Like when it's you, it just feels like what I'm doing, like what I'm supposed to be doing. Like it feels like, you know, what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, I highly recommend the book Yellow Wife. Again, the website Adventures by the Book, where you can pick up a copy. Highly recommend it. You can invite her to your book club and group, and you can ask questions on stage if you want. I see that Debbie just invited herself up on stage. So, hi, Debbie. Do you have a question or comment for Sadeqa?
Hi, I actually have both. First a comment, Sadiqa. I loved Yellow Wife. It was difficult to read, but I couldn't put it down, and it was very powerful. So um, it was a favorite of 2021. So thank you for writing it. Then my next thing is a question for you. So you said the thing that scares you the most is the thing you need to do next. Is
Mm.
what encouraged you to write the book. So can you kind of peel that back for us? What did you do first? I mean, I know you talked about how you got the inspiration for it, but how did you actually conquer that beast? Then what did you do? Did you just kind of sit down and start doing research and then the story kind of unfolded itself more to you that way? Or how did you go about conquering that?
Thank you, Debbie, for that question. I had to realize that I had to approach it the way I normally approach writing a book, which is I have to start with an outline. And because when I was writing Love in a Carry-On Bag, as I said, it took me 10 years to write because I was literally just throwing darts at the page, hoping that something would stick. But as I became a little bit more easy with writing, I know that I need some sort of framework. So I sat down and I kind of pulled together an outline for myself. But I also had to do a lot of the world building that I had not had to do in previous books. Like I wrote about New Jersey. I lived in New Jersey. There was no world building. I just went down, I wrote about the street I lived on. But for this, I literally cut out pictures. Like I searched the net for pictures of what Richmond looked like, what a plantation looked like, what slave cabins would look like, what the city looked like, what the jail looked like, the cobblestone streets. And I pasted them up on my writing wall so that every time I sat down and I got stuck, I could look up at this picture to help me kind of build this world. So with the research, I started with the world building, and then I'm very character driven. So it really needed to be Phoebe's story. It needed to be in her voice. And I knew that it needed to be first person because it was a story that I wanted readers to feel up close and personal with. When I write in third person, it's because I want to give them a little bit of distance. And I didn't want that. I wanted you to move through the story and feel every emotion that she felt. And so I did my character bio and I started to think about the different characters. And, it's a lot of back and forth. I'll tell you one of the things that happened was at first when I was writing Yellow Wife, I thought the master of the plantation, Master Jacobs, I thought he was on his second wife. and that he had a wife before. And so I wrote it that way for a little bit, and then it didn't work. So I had to go back and say, wait, maybe that was his sister. And so that's how Miss Sally became his sister. So there's a lot of back and forth trying to, for me, writing is like a puzzle. You have all these beautiful pieces, and sometimes you have to turn it different ways to make them fit so that the story is flowing.
Great question and great answer. Debbie, did that answer your question? Did you have any others?
It did. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, so I'm kind of curious. So what's the thing that scares you the most now?
Mm. What scares me the most now? Well, it's not getting COVID anymore because I had that. So been there, done that. That was a little bit scary for a while. Right now, I think I'm in a place of all good things. There's all good things from here. I feel like I'm in the flow. I feel like I am in the receiving mode where I'm just like, which way am I supposed to go? Just direct me. I'm just asking God to just let me know what I'm supposed to do next. Just what am I supposed to be writing? What am I supposed to be thinking? And that surrender has been working for me because sometimes I'll try and go ahead and then I'm all a mess. And so now I'm just kind of like, no, I'm going to wait until you tell me to move. So right now I would have to say I'm not really in a scary place.
Except that, I have to say you're the mother of 3 teenagers. That's scary enough without anything else playing into it.
There you go. There you go. If I had to worry about my career and the kids, that's too much.
Exactly. Thank you, Debbie, for your good questions.
Yeah, thank you. That was a beautiful answer. I appreciate that. Looking
You're
forward to what you're
welcome.
doing next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Amber has just joined us up on stage. Welcome, Amber. Did you have a question or a comment for Sadeqa?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hmm.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Sadiqa. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's so awesome to be here right now. So, Yellow Wife depicted the physical, psychological, and spiritual damages brought on by slavery. And I think that it confronted this dark period in history with respect, and it was very educational for us readers. So, my question to you is, did you know going into this story what you wanted the message to be? Or did you kind of find it along the way? And how did you, you know, kind of, tiptoe on that line with some of the scenes that were in the book? So I'm just kind of curious what your process on that was.
Towing the line sometimes was very difficult, particularly when I was writing The Jailer, because he was a man of two faces. And so towing that line of him, being one way with business and then sometimes one way, with his family, with Phoebe, was very difficult. But no, I didn't really know the message when I started Yellow Wife. I think my motivation was that women like Mary Lumpkin had been forgotten, had been blotted from history, that there was no big paper trail on their lives. And so for me, it was important to just shed a light on women like her. Karina Hinton in the book is also a real life character, and she was the wife of another jailer, Silas Omohandro. And when I discovered their story, I kept thinking, well, how come we don't know this? These types of stories are not things that we learn in school. So it was important for me to kind of make sure that these women's names were not forgotten.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so insightful.
Thank you for your question, Amber, for joining us on stage. And I know our time is winding down, so one last notice to everyone in the audience, if you have anything to say or ask of.
Susan, you're on mute again.
Okay, so I was just talking away. What was I just saying? That our time is winding down. And so anybody in the audience else has questions, make sure to come up and join us while you have the chance to talk with January's Barnes & Noble Author of the Month, Book of the Month, Yellow Wife. It's a great opportunity to chat with her. Yes, give her a round of applause. She's
Thank
amazing.
you.
But I want to go back to something you said very early on about, the dream to be an actress. So I have a 2-part question for you has The Yellow Wife been optioned for film? And if so, would you ever consider, if offered, would you play a role, even a small role in the film?
Wow. Well, I will tell you that I did some background work for Harriet. The movie Harriet was shot in Richmond. So my daughters and I actually were in a scene together. I don't think you could see us because, like I said, it was background work, but it was still very fun and very interesting. And, it made me feel kind of close to Phoebe in the story I was writing because I was working on Yellow Wife at that time. As far as an option, this is what I will say. I do believe that the conversation is being had out there somewhere. The conversation just has not reached me yet, but I am open and willing to receive it when it makes its way to me. And absolutely, I would star in my own movie.
That's awesome. I see that on the vision board. We're putting it out there via Fireside, social media, our vision boards, our wish, because I think it'd make a powerful film, and I'd love to see you star in it. Although you're just, I mean, you've got the natural look for that. You're beautiful, you're charismatic. You may have to tone down that really beautiful smile in those tough scenes. Funny that a long time ago I was an extra in the film Seabiscuit. I don't know if you remember that movie. Um,
Yeah.
but when I knew it was such a small, tiny role. It was an extra that I actually slow mode the film so I could pick myself out in that little tiny dot. And I think I'm the only one who could find myself. But did you find yourself doing that in the
I
film?
did, but I didn't find myself. I didn't,
Oh,
but I had a good time.
that's great. So, what are you working on now?
Right now, I literally have just turned in my fifth novel to Simon and Schuster last Monday. It's called Where the Bad Girls Go, and it's another historical, which I'm pretty certain that I've been bitten by the historical fiction bug after being afraid of it. Now I'm like, yes, what's next? And this story takes place between 1947 and 1951. So a little bit closer to where we are. And it takes place between New York, I'm sorry, not New York, Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. It's told in two different voices, and it deals with themes of motherhood and sexuality and classism and colorism. And, at the heart of it, there's this thing that pulls these two characters together. I'm still working on my 30-second soundbite on that book.
That sounded pretty good to me. Well, congratulations on turning that in. That's exciting. We readers have something else to look forward to. So, as we're winding down, is there anything else I haven't mentioned that you want to talk about, or any announcements to make? Anything you want to say?
I would say just keep reading and keep supporting authors like me. We need readers, we need book clubs, we need your support. We need you to tell your aunties and your cousins and your best friends about us because it takes a lot for us to write a book. I know some people have said to me, "Oh wow, I read Yellow Wife in 6 hours," and while I'm very flattered that you couldn't put my book down, I'm like, "Whew, that was 2.5 years of my life." So continue to support us and continue to support your local booksellers.
Yeah, and I have to emphasize that because because I work with authors a lot through my business. I'm privy to the fact of the struggles and the turmoil that authors have to go through on a daily basis, but especially during COVID. I mean, these authors are spending years of their life researching and writing books. As Sadeqa mentioned, you read it in 6 hours and then it's like, well, what's next? It's like, wait a minute, let's talk about it. Let's embrace it. Let's invite our book club to talk about it and really have a deep, meaningful conversation about it. Let's, share the book with other people. And that's one of the reasons we founded Novel Network, is you can go on there, you can find great authors like Sadeqa for free, visit with them on a book club, and have a conversation like this with you in the comfort of your own living room with your own friends. It's just remarkable that authors like Sadeqa are willing to do that and make themselves available. So I really do hope you take the time to do that. It's really hard for them. All their book tours have been canceled. Their events have been canceled. It's really hard to put yourself out there. And Yeah, so I hope that you will do that. And how can readers follow you? Are you on social media? Which platforms are you on, and how do they find you?
Absolutely. Right now, I'm really loving Instagram. So if you come over to Instagram, you can find me at Sadiqa Says. So it's just my name and the word says after it. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, but I love Instagram. And you can go to my website, which is sadiqajohnson.net. It has all of my events. I'm currently on a Yellow Wife trade paperback tour. Oh, I didn't even get to show
Oh yeah,
the beautiful, yes, the beautiful new paperback
it's a
of
gorgeous
Yellow
book.
Wife. I think they did a lovely job with it. It just came
Absolutely.
out, so make sure you get your copy from Adventures by the Book. But yeah, so I'm on tour. I feel like I barely stopped touring from the hardcover book. Like I literally, I felt like I toured most of last year, and then I took a little bit of break for December, and then I'm right back at it again because I love it. You know, I love talking to people about books. I love talking about Yellow Wife. I love being with book lovers. So I'm on tour. If you go to my webpage, sadiqajohnson.net, you'll get the full schedule.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you can also click on Sadiqa's icon here and follow her here so that anytime she's on Fireside, you'll get a notification. And I hope you do come back and chat with us, Sadiqa.
Absolutely.
And we do author events almost weekly here on Adventures by the Book on Fireside. So if you click on my icon and follow me, you'll get notice of any of our upcoming events. Our next event, I believe, is going to be February 3rd with the First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid, who will be talking about her book, Secrets of the Spray Car, about Iceland's stellar record, which we could all emulate, of equal rights for women. It's going to be a fascinating chat, and I hope you join us. So until next time, thank you, audience, for coming and joining us and chatting with Sadiqa. Again, if you want a copy of her book, visit
Thank
adventuresbythebook.com.
you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
she's
you.
fabulous, and I love chatting with her. She's always got a smile on her face. She's a
Oh,
talented writer, much more to come, and much that has been done already that the world is recognizing with all her stellar awards. So until next time, everybody, thank you, Sadiqa. Ask
thank
yourself
you.
the question, what will be your next adventure by the book? Bye, everybody.
Thank you.